Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Brightspace session. The inFocus sessions that we run on Tuesdays and Thursdays serve a couple of different purposes. One of them is that we try and focus in on one particular workflow within Brightspace. And some of those that we've looked at in the past have included things like working with the Rubrics tool in Brightspace, working with creating assignments, for example, or the quiz tool. Today's session is going to look specifically at the marking process within Brightspace in the assignment tool. They have a tendency to go a little bit all over the place. That's to be expected in a new system with people having lots of new questions, and that's fine. We do encourage you to use either the chat or the Q&A to pop your questions in as we go, but I will stop obviously as questions arise to draw breath, get some water into me, etc. But the distinction between the Tuesday and Thursday sessions, which are a bit targeted, and the Monday, Wednesday, Friday sessions, which are general drop-in and support sessions, is that we try and stay at least a little bit on topic if possible. So my name's Lachlan Kalish. I'm joined by Kelly Boone from the project team as well. And Kelly will be fielding those questions and trying to make sure I don't go off the rails too much. So today's session, we want to have a look at the assignment tool and particularly marking. So what I'm going to do to begin with is I'm going to jump into some subject site that actually has some assignments that have been submitted. The first thing I want to do in this space is actually submit an assignment as a student, so you get some visibility of what that looks like for students from their perspective, obviously. So I'm able to do that with my role. I'm going to just switch over to an admin role that I have access to in this site. And we might choose to be a student that is enrolled in Bathurst Distance. So if I bring up my class list, I'm going to change to Bathurst Distance. I want to have a look at students that are enrolled as Bathurst Distance. So I'm going to switch my view from showing me the teaching team to showing me students. And at this point, I'm going to pretend to be Kathleen Treneman. I do know Kath, so she's going to get some emails shortly as a result of me impersonating her. All right, I'm now impersonating her in the system inside this subject site. Now this student, if we go into their assessment section, I'm going to jump into the assignments area. They have access to a number of assessments for Bathurst Distance. They haven't submitted anything yet. Okay, so clicking on the title of the assignment, this one's coming up, 1st of July. Better get my skates on and get an assignment submitted. It brings up the initial information. It's going to be submitted to Turnitin. A rubric has been attached to this assignment, so I actually see that here. Unless you hide the rubric from the students, they are going to see it when they go through this initial dialogue. I also have the scores not hidden in the rubric, which means the student is seeing those scores here. This informs really how we use the rubric tool when we're configuring the rubric. Do we want this stuff visible to the students or not? Right, moving through, I now get my academic integrity declaration, submit assignments, accountability stuff, etc. And I now finally get to attach a file to submit. I'm going to add a file, browse my computer. Keep in mind that if a student is working with a file stored in their locker, or they're in a group and they have a file stored within their group locker, they can retrieve it at this point and add it as part of their submission. A little bit of background information there if you're using lockers. So let's find a file from my computer. Doesn't really matter what it is. Let's find something underneath documents maybe. Setting up grades in Bright. Okay, there's a quick guide document. I'll add that. This is a Word document that I've added. It shows me how big it is. So I'm going to hit add. There's the file. You can also put in a personal message for the academic. Give me a HD, please. And hit submit. That's now gone through. I get a confirmation. It also tells me that I'm getting a confirmation email. So Kathleen has just received an email from the system telling us. So I'm probably going to have a Teams message waiting for me after this session saying, what are you doing? I can upload additional files at this point if I wanted to, but if you don't submit multiple files at the first point, these will count as a resubmission. They will go over the top of that other file. So there's a difference between submitting multiple files at once and using this upload more files, which is a resubmission. Hit done, and it will now show me, or show Kathleen rather, that I have one submission that has gone into the system. Now, if that student then clicks on this one submission over here, we'll see that it is talking to Turnitin in the background. It'll take a minute or two to generate that score. You can also see her message that she provided to the academic there. It's also got our Turnitin submission ID underneath. There's our timestamp. I'll hit F5 and refresh a little bit and see how long it takes to get this score. You'll notice that this submission history area for the student will allow them to actually see their submissions for any assignments that they've made within the subject as well. So it's quite versatile in that sense. Maybe while I'm waiting for the score to generate, I might switch back to being a subject convener before I start getting aggressive emails from Kathleen saying, what are you doing with my account? All right, so I'm going to change to being Lachlan, the subject convener. I'm going to go into my assignment dashboard. We were looking at Bathurst distance, and I have a new submission waiting there for me. So I have a hyperlink that will take me directly to Kathleen's paper if that's what I'm inclined to do. Or I could open up my assignment dashboard by clicking on the title, which will give me a view of all users initially, whether or not they have submitted or not. Or I can refine that view down to particular sections. Bathurst distance only. And if I look through this list, there's Kathleen down the bottom. And the key icon, I can see a question there. That tells me that a student has been given an extension, Nicole, and we will get to extensions in this process shortly. So it's still talking to Turnitin to get that score. What I might do, there it is. The score is generated down the bottom. This is annoying for me to have to go through the list whether they've submitted or not. So I'm going to change my view at the top to the submissions tab. This will only show me those students who have submitted. So I can see that I have one that's submitted 29 days late. Terrible, Beck. Terrible. Then we have some others. You can see some high similarity matches going on there. And here's Kathleen's submission here underneath. Now, with the Turnitin score, if I actually open that up by clicking on it, that'll open up the Turnitin Feedback Studio for me, keeping in mind that we no longer have access to the blue Turnitin Feedback Studio options that we previously used. We do all of that in Brightspace now. So this gives me access to the similarity report only, at which point I can open up those tools and start looking at where parts of this document have come from. All right, so that's telling me that this document is not original. Doesn't surprise me. I wrote it and have used it elsewhere, but that's how the Turnitin integration works.
Lockie,
I'll stop there.
Just have a quick question. With regards to Turnitin, when the assessment is submitted, does Turnitin automatically check it?
Once it's submitted, yes, as long as Turnitin has been set up for the assignment. So some assignments in this dashboard, it's a good question. If I jump back to my assignment dashboard in another tab, some of these, for example, this first one, there's no Turnitin icon here. So I can see no binoculars telling me that Turnitin's been set up. This one does have the Turnitin icon telling me that it's enabled, but it all comes down to how the initial assignment shell has been configured. If you set up the assignment in your master site, for example, with Turnitin enabled, it will continue to have that Turnitin check as a part of the submission process available to both the student and the academic. Yep, so they can absolutely use that. All right, coming back to our
Sorry, Lachlan,
submission view. Hey, Liz.
sorry, just one extra question on that
Sure.
Turnitin stuff. So is that applies to all file types if it's been set up in that assessment shell for Turnitin?
When we create the assignment, the actual file types are important, obviously, but if we're looking at the file extensions, this is the stuff we want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
What we tell everyone is to choose annotatable files, because all of the annotatable file types are compatible with Turnitin. So that will be Word, PDF, PowerPoint, Excel as our 4 default. Main, that covers 90-something% of the types of file submissions that we're dealing with. If you have a type of assessment that falls outside of that category, you're not going to get a Turnitin score.
Yeah, okay, got it.
So as
Thank
long
you.
as you're coming in and selecting annotatable files as part of the setup of your assignment shell, you will get that. You will be able to then Turnitin down the bottom underneath evaluation feedback, manage Turnitin and turn it on. It'll get that score for you.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so looking at our submission dashboard, I've got 3 submissions in here. I do have a few options at this point as well, including the ability to email anyone who hasn't submitted yet. So if you get to a certain point and you want to send a comms out to your students that haven't submitted by the due date, a day before the due date, whatever the case may be, a week before, you can certainly launch that comms from here. You can either use that tab to start sending it to everybody, or you can actually use this dashboard from a user view, for example, and actually target who's going to get it. So if I wanted to just send it to these students, for example, I could use this email tool and send a targeted communications to those students because they haven't submitted yet. So there's either the blanket option at the top, or we can start getting a little bit selective around who's going to get the comms. Anyway, let's get into marking. So going back to Kathleen's submission, I've had a look at her Turnitin report. I'm now going to go into her paper. Selecting the paper opens up our Brightspace marking interface. On the left-hand side, we get a preview of the student submission. As long as it's one of those file types that I was talking about a minute ago, I will be able to see it on the left, and I will be able to use the full range of marking tools that we have here. If I zoom in a little bit on this screen, let's get a better look at this. You can adjust the size of the marking window and the preview window in the middle. Right now, I want to focus on the student submission. Let me zoom out a little bit. What can we do in the annotation bar? The first step. So you mean opening the student submission, Nicole? Is that what we're getting at? Yeah. Okay. From the submission list, just click on the actual file that the student has submitted here on the left. That's it. That opens up the preview. Okay, so what can we do annotation-wise with the student preview? We've got annotation tools here with the pen. Click on that. One of them is a set of highlighter tools. So I've got a freeform drawing tool. Kathleen, this bit's horrible, etc. I can then choose a text highlighter, which will then only highlight lines of text. It's a little bit cleaner. I've also got an eraser tool, which will get rid of bits and pieces if I needed to. Next up, we've got a sticky note tool, which will let me put in sticky notes of different colors in the paper. So this part, horrible, etc. You can then put in as many of those as you like, drag them around wherever you like. Then we have our text tools. The first one being an inline text. You can move those around again if you need to move them somewhere else. We also have a couple of other tools. You can change the fill color of the box. They're a bit gimmicky for me, but basically you can type inline in the document anywhere. Then there are some relational arrow, directional arrow type tools. If you want to draw people's attention to a certain part, you can do that. We also have a rectangular tool, which will draw a box around particular parts of the assignment if you want to draw attention to that. So that's the box. And then we go like so. So we have quite a few options for annotation and markup. There are no quick marks tools inside the Brightspace marking tool at this point in time. All right, so yep, I do get asked that pretty much every time I run this particular type of training. I think they're working on one. I think we'll have one by the end of the year, but right now there are no quick marks. All right, so those are the tools available to us for annotating inline text. You can redo and undo up here on the right-hand side as well. If I zoom out a little bit, what else can we do with the student submission? We can print it to PDF or to a local device. We can download it with this cloud icon. We can either get the student original file or we can get a copy of it with all of the annotations that we've made. And you can also open the student preview in full screen if you want to as well. So those are the tools we have for inline marking or annotation. Over on the right-hand side, and I'm going to change my handlebars here to make this section a bit bigger for us. We've got a number of different things to work with. One of them is our rubric. If you've got a rubric attached, you'll get a condensed view of that rubric here. This is a quantitative rubric, which is going to score this task out of 40. Maybe the task is worth 40, maybe it's not. But if the rubric value is different to the task weighting, it will convert the score of the rubric to the task weighting automatically. So as an example, in nursing, they score most of their papers out of 100. In the rubric, this will transform that mark out of 100 into the task weighting automatically. So in my condensed view of the rubric, and I'm using that term condensed because if I wanted to open it in full screen, there is an option here at the top. I'll open that up in a minute. In the condensed view, I can go through and hover on my different areas. So this part, distinction, if I select that, you'll see that it has taken that initial value and populated it here at the top, but I can click within that value on the right-hand side and start adjusting that however I want, up, down, sideways, etc. So if I want this to be 13.85, 14, 15, etc., it will do that for me. It's adjusted it there. These are simply the starting points for that calculation. And you'll see that it is tallying them as we go. Inside each of the criterion, we can add criterion level feedback for each of these. It's not just the overall feedback. We can provide criterion feedback just for this part. And you'll notice that it also gives you the Brightspace editing tools here, which means that if you wanted to add attachments just to this criterion level feedback, you could. If you wanted to use your webcam or your microphone to provide audio feedback against this particular criterion, you could. That tool set is available for any of the content editing that we do in Brightspace as well. So criterion level feedback, individual scores being captured by selecting each of our criterion scales. It has tallied the total to a mark out of 40. And if I scroll down further, you'll see here that we have the overall grade, which has been automatically converted. So it's done that for us from the quantitative rubric through to the actual task weighting. Underneath that, we have our overall feedback tool. It'll take up to about 3,500 characters, I think. So it's quite long if you want to provide your feedback in there. Underneath it, you will see that we can also add attachments. So at this point, we have an answer to the question of, what if I want to download this and provide my feedback in Word like I did in EASE and then reattach it? You can do that here with the file upload and attach your file from your computer back to the student document, and they will get that back as part of their feedback. Right? So you can certainly mark offline if you want to and reattach it to the student submission as a part of their feedback. And if you did that, and I choose a file, doesn't matter what it is, they then get the document underneath as part of their feedback. The other feedback tools we have available at that point, we have the record audio and video function, which again will turn on the webcam or just your microphone if that's what you want, and you can provide them with multimodal feedback on the task at the same point in time. The other two options you have here are either a web link or a quick link. So if you wanted to point the student back to a part of the content, the discussion, wherever within your subject site as a part of your feedback, you can use that tool to do so. Now, what haven't I shown you here? We've done overall feedback. We looked at the rubric tool. I'm going to pop the rubric out in full screen rather than the condensed view that we have here. If I hit that pop out option, here's our full rubric with all of the descriptors visible to us. So you can go through that view if you're more comfortable with it. You can add your individual criterion level feedback underneath. If this is more comfortable for you rather than that condensed view that I was looking at, you can do that. You can change which of the criterion scales you're choosing. You can adjust the mark over here on the right-hand side up and down if you need to. So you can grade within a range is what I'm getting at here broadly. It has all of the same functionality. It just might be a bit more comfortable for you because it's in full screen basically rather than that condensed view.
Lockie,
So,
sorry,
yep.
sorry. I can't see the raise hand option on my screen for some reason. But my question is, with the rubric, if I adjust the score, so let's say you gave them a distinction and it was out of 16 and the distinction range was up to 14. If I went 14.5, which would then put the student into a HD, does the rubric automatically adjust itself? No, so I could have a misalignment between the two, between the actual grade and the rubric. You could,
yeah, and it's a really good point. It's why I've been suggesting to people when they set up those base scores, those base values for each of the criterion, that maybe they choose the maximum for that band, and that way they can tell their markers to adjust down. They're never going to adjust it up. So if I was saying that 13.4 was the maximum for a distinction, I'd be saying to my markers, make sure you're only like if you're adjusting that down, it'll still fall within, for a little while at least, within that category. If you put it right in the middle, you're kind of more at risk of going up into HD territory without them knowing, if you know what I mean. I don't know, that might just be my thinking, but certainly as long as you're aware that there is no restriction within adjusting up or down that is going to automatically change where this tick sits into the next scale.
So question, can we put a range in? So when I did the Turnitin sort of marking rubric is similar to this one in the sense that you can have this sort of drag something along the line and then you can expand it into the full rubric. But in that rubric, you can actually have, I guess, the range. So you will have, instead of just, when you expand this rubric, you just have one square for distinction, one for credit, one for pass. But in Turnitin, we were able to put it in such a way that we had, 3 squares for distinction and they each had different values. So going from what's the minimum distinction to the highest distinction, and same with credit, you'd have sort of 3 different values, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, so the reason that we were creating additional columns in Turnitin was because it only let you have one set value for the column effectively, or for the scale. So you were adding an extra one, so it gave you some versatility to be able to grade within a range. But with this tool, whilst you choose obviously the criterion scale that you want first and then adjust it up or down, it allows you to grade within a range, but it won't stop you. Now, if you created a rubric that had more than the 5 columns, for example, of HD through to fail, you can add as many columns as you like if you wanted them to have a preset value, but it's not going to stop you from or your markers from being able to change that value over here on the right to whatever you want. So it does require a little bit of discipline in that sense of knowing that they could still modify that initial base score. It doesn't lock you to that score.
Okay, and the mark is the one that overrides the little
whatever's in the tick.
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, now there's a few other bits of information I want to give to you here about the marking tool. Arguably the most important is that down the bottom here, we've got two terms, save draft and publish. Now, if you hit save draft, your marking is preserved, but it hasn't gone back to the student yet. It's waiting for someone, maybe the convener, for example, to publish the feedback to the students. Publish means it's going to go into the gradebook. The student will get an email saying it's been graded, and they will have access to their mark and their feedback. Otherwise, you're going to be telling your markers to always save draft. Now, there are ways in the system to remove the visibility of the publish option to anyone but the subject convener, for example, but by default, anyone who can mark will also be able to see the publish button. So there is some, can you do a multiple publish? Yep, you absolutely can, and I'll show you how to do that, Nicole. But by default, both of these buttons will be visible to all of your markers. So we talk about this quite a lot in the both in Engage Assess and also in the Prepare session to some extent, when you modify the settings of an assignment to restrict the visibility of the publish button. But you need to understand that by default, anyone who can mark in the subject is also going to be able to publish. All right. The other thing that we have access to as part of our marking setup, as part of the three dots that are at the right here, some settings, you can change some of your assignment settings. You can preview the student assignment in full screen. We've got it over here, but if you wanted to open it separately, you could. We also have access to the special access dates. And what that is in Brightspace language is extensions. So if I wanted to give this particular student an extension, I can do it from here by clicking this button. And I can change the due date for this one student. That can be done here. And I could say, right, you're getting another 7 days. I would suggest that's not usually how we approach the workflow for extensions, by waiting until the student has submitted something and then giving them an extension. It's not usually how it works. We normally go in and apply extensions because the student hasn't submitted something potentially. But you can access the extension interface for one student from these three dots. So look, what I'm going to do here at this point is actually hit Save Draft. So that's been done. I'm going to go back to my submission dashboard. So Kathleen's has been evaluated. What I'm going to do at this point is actually show you how to give extensions for multiple students. I'm also going to talk about publishing. Now, up here in the top left-hand corner above our user and submissions tabs, we've got the Publish All button. So Nicole, that answers your question there, is that you're able to publish all of the papers that have been evaluated. And at that point, all of those students would get their grades. Anything that has been draft marked would be published by clicking Publish All. If I go to my Users tab, we'll see that we also have an option appearing here for Publish Feedback. So another way of publishing all would actually be, I can publish individual feedback. So if I'm happy to give Beck hers and no one else, I can select that box and go to Publish Feedback. And that would go back to her only. I could, in fact, select all users inside the subject and hit Publish Feedback, and that would do exactly the same thing as Publish All. Yeah, so it means that it's got to be manually done. Absolutely. Now, the other way that we publish feedback, regardless of whether it is in our assignment tool that we've been looking at, assignment dashboard, or quizzes, or accessible discussions, that publishing can all be done via the Quick Eval tool. Now, if I'm speaking another language, the Quick Eval tool lives inside your subject admin area. Underneath Assessment, we find Quick Eval. And the Quick Eval tool is a dashboard which will allow you to initiate the marking process for any type of assessment, whether it's discussion, assignment, or quiz. So I can see I've got assignments in here that students have started to submit, And we can see that language here: completed, evaluated, published. Completed means the students have submitted. Evaluated means it's been draft marked. Published means it's gone back to the student. So if I look at this example here, I've got the option of being able to start marking for assessment 1 for Bathurst distance. I can look only at those who have submitted. And over here underneath more actions, I've got the publish all option. So I can do my publishing, release it to everybody from here, from the Quick Eval tool as well. So either within the individual assessment tools or from the Quick Eval dashboard. Either will allow you to do that. So that's a bit of a lightning tour into the marking process inside Brightspace in the assignment tool. What I'm going to do there is turn off the recording, and we're happy to hang around for 5 minutes or so for any questions or comments from people in here.